It is 3:18 a.m. The Strait of Hormuz, 19 nautical miles northeast of the Musandam Peninsula, in the narrowest and most consequential stretch of water on the surface of the Earth. At this precise location, the navigable channel for deep draft vessels compresses to barely 2 miles in each direction. A geographic choke point so strategically significant that approximately 21 million barrels of oil transit through it every single day, roughly 21% of total global petroleum consumption, flowing through a corridor of water that a determined adversary with the right assets could theoretically threaten, with nothing more sophisticated than a few fast boats and the willingness to accept the consequences. The water here is 65 meters deep at the channel center, shallow by open ocean standards, but deep enough that the acoustic environment is complex, unpredictable, and operationally demanding for every sensor system that relies on sound to see through it. The sky is overcast. No stars. No moon. Visibility at the surface is under 2 nautical miles. The wind is from the southeast at 14 knots, driving a low chop that makes small craft operations uncomfortable without making them impossible. USS The Sullivans, DDG-68, is transiting northeast at 16 knots. She is an Arleigh Burke-class Flight 1 guided missile destroyer, one of the earlier variants of a class that represents the backbone of American surface warfare capability worldwide. At 8,300 tons full load displacement, armed with 90 vertical launch system cells, loaded with a mix of standard missiles, Tomahawk cruise missiles, and ASROC anti-submarine rockets, equipped with the AN/SPY-1D phased array radar and the full Aegis Combat System. She is a warship that any serious naval analyst would describe as comprehensively lethal. Her crew numbers 281 sailors. Her commanding officer has 22 years in surface warfare. Her tactical action officer has 13. Between them, they have seen more gray zone encounters in this particular body of water than most naval officers accumulate in an entire career. Neither of them is surprised by what appears on the radar at 3:22 a.m. 4 contacts. Small. Fast. Radar cross-sections consistent with IRGCN Seraj-class fast attack craft, fiberglass hulled, approximately 27 meters in length, displacing roughly 50 tons, powered by twin water-jet propulsion systems capable of sustained speeds above 50 knots in calm water. Armed with rocket-propelled grenades, heavy machine guns, and in some documented configurations, short-range anti-ship missiles that the IRGCN describes as domestically produced, but that Western intelligence has characterized as derivatives of technology acquired through procurement networks that international sanctions were not entirely successful in blocking. They are not individually capable of defeating an Arleigh Burke in any engagement scenario that a competent tactician would recognize as favorable for the attacker. What they are capable of, when properly employed in coordinated swarm geometry against a vessel constrained by a narrow channel, is creating the kind of multi-axis threat environment that stresses defensive response timelines in ways that individual capability assessments do not capture. The 4 Seraj contacts were bearing 245, 258, 017, and 032 respectively. 4 vectors, roughly distributed around the compass, each closing at speeds between 38 and 44 knots. They had been pre-positioned. The timing of their appearance, simultaneous activation from 4 different bearings, was not the product of opportunistic patrol activity. It was the product of a coordination signal, transmitted and received before USS The Sullivans had entered this section of the strait, that told 4 separate crews to begin their approach at the same moment. Somebody had known the American destroyer was coming. Somebody had put assets in position before she arrived. And now, those assets were converging on a 8,300-ton warship from 4 directions in the dark. The commanding officer was on the bridge at 3:22 a.m. He had been there since the ship entered the strait at 2:47 a.m., not because standing orders required bridge presence for the entire transit, but because his 22 years of experience in this region had long since calcified into a professional reflex. You do not transit the Strait of Hormuz in the dark without being where you can see what is happening and act on it immediately. He looked at the radar picture. He looked at the closing geometries. He looked at the timing. Battle stations, he said. Not a shout. Not an urgent command. A statement made in the tone of a man reading from a checklist he has rehearsed many times. Get me the TAO and launch the Seahawk. The ship went to battle stations in under 4 minutes. The MH-60R Seahawk that had been sitting on the flight deck with its crew strapped in and rotors engaged, a precaution standard for Hormuz transits, lifted off at 3:24 a.m. and immediately began climbing to 400 feet. Its AN/AP S-153 multi-mode radar spinning up, its FLIR turret slewing toward the southwestern sector, where the 2 closest contacts were approaching fastest. The 5th contact appeared at 3:26 a.m. It was larger, much larger. The radar return was consistent with a vessel displacing between 1,400 and 1,800 tons, a ship in the size class of an IRGCN Moudge-class frigate. Bearing 210, range 34 nautical miles, speed 22 knots, on a course that projected directly toward USS The Sullivans' position in approximately 93 minutes. The Moudge-class, Iran's domestically designed and constructed light frigate, is a vessel that Iranian state media has described in breathless terms as a world-class warship, a symbol of Iranian naval engineering achievement, proof that the Islamic Republic can build competitive modern warships despite 4 decades of comprehensive international sanctions. It carries surface-to-air missiles, anti-ship missiles, a 76mm naval gun, and torpedo tubes. Iranian admirals have paraded it in front of cameras as evidence of Iranian naval power reaching new heights. American naval intelligence has a somewhat more clinical assessment. The Moudge-class is a 1,400-ton light frigate built around a hull form derived from older British frigate designs, equipped with weapon systems whose lineage traces to equipment Iran possessed before the 1979 revolution, and which has been maintained, reverse-engineered, and incrementally upgraded through a defense industrial base operating under severe technology, import restrictions for over 40 years. Its fire control systems are not integrated in any meaningful sense with the fast attack craft it is nominally operating in coordination with tonight. The Moudge and the Seraj boats cannot share a targeting picture in real time, cannot coordinate engagements through a common data link, cannot build the kind of composite tactical picture that the American destroyer they are converging on maintains with every asset in its operational area, automatically and continuously through Link 16. The IRGCN formation is a collection of individually capable vessels attempting to act as a coordinated unit without the digital integration architecture that makes coordination real rather than aspirational. Against a less capable adversary, against a commercial vessel, or a Coast Guard cutter, this limitation might not matter. Against an Aegis destroyer, it is the difference between a threat and a manageable tactical problem. USS The Sullivans' Aegis Combat System had all 5 contacts in simultaneous track within 90 seconds of the Moudge's appearance on the radar. Not sequential track, simultaneous. Every contact, every bearing, every speed, every projected track, every CPA calculation, updating continuously in real time on a tactical display that the TAO, the commanding officer, and every relevant watchstander could read simultaneously. The system was not struggling with the 5-contact environment. It was not prioritizing between targets. It was handling all 5 with the same effortless computational authority it would bring to tracking 50. The Aegis Combat System was designed to manage precisely this kind of multi-axis, mixed-threat environment. It was designed specifically and deliberately to be better at this than anything any adversary operates. The Seahawk reached the southwestern sector at 3:27 a.m. and established its orbit at 400 feet. The FLIR locked the 2 closest Seraj contacts at a range of 14 nautical miles. In the thermal image, both vessels were clearly visible, their water jet propulsion generating bright heat signatures at the stern, deck crew visible as white silhouettes moving toward the bow. The sensor operator noted that both vessels appeared to have crew members in the forward positions consistent with weapons preparation. He logged the observation, time-stamped it, and continued his orbit. At 3:29 a.m., USS The Sullivans transmitted on Channel 16. The message was calm, precisely worded, and legally exact. It identified the ship by name. It stated her position in international waters under transit, pursuant to the right of innocent passage, codified in UNCLOS Article 38. It directed all vessels on closing courses to identify themselves, state their intentions, and take immediate action to avoid collision in accordance with the Convention on the International Regulations for Preventing Collisions at Sea. The message was transmitted in English and in Farsi. It was repeated once. Then the radio went quiet. The response came 47 seconds later. A transmission on Channel 16 in Farsi from a vessel that did not identify itself. The transmission declared that USS The Sullivans was transiting waters under the sovereign jurisdiction of the Islamic Republic of Iran, that the approaching vessels were conducting a lawful maritime enforcement operation, and that the American warship was required to stop her engines, cease her transit, and submit to inspection by Iranian maritime authorities. The transmission cited provisions of Iranian domestic legislation that have no standing under any internationally recognized interpretation of the law of the sea. It was, from a legal standpoint, without any validity whatsoever. It was, from a propaganda standpoint, exactly what it was designed to be. A recorded assertion transmitted on an internationally monitored frequency that Iran exercises sovereign authority over the Strait of Hormuz, an assertion that, if the American ship responded to it in any way that implied acknowledgement, would be clipped, broadcast, and narrated into a state media segment about Iranian naval power. The commanding officer of USS The Sullivans responded to this transmission in the only appropriate way. He did not respond. Not because he hadn't heard it, not because he was uncertain how to reply, but because the correct response to a legally meritless demand from an unidentified vessel in international waters is silence. And the commanding officer knew this with the certainty of a man who had read the relevant guidance multiple times and had discussed it with his judge advocate general officer during the pre-transit brief. At 3:34 a.m., the 4 Seraj contacts had closed to 9, 12, 7, and 11 nautical miles, respectively. The southwestern contact, the closest, at 7 nautical miles, had increased speed to 48 knots and was on a direct approach vector to the Sullivans port beam. At 48 knots, covering 7 nautical miles, approximately 8 minutes and 45 seconds to contact with the ship's hull, the Seahawk descended from 400 feet to 200 feet and repositioned its orbit to place itself directly between the southwestern Seraj contact and the Sullivans port beam. Its navigation lights were illuminated. Its searchlight carved a column of white light into the dark water between the 2 vessels. And at a signal from the sensor operator, a brief pulse of the aircraft's non-lethal targeting laser, green and instantaneous, sweeping across the Seraj's bridge, the helicopter communicated everything the situation required without a single additional radio transmission. We see you. We are recording you. We have assets you have not fully accounted for. And we are positioned in your approach vector in a way that your captain cannot ignore without making a decision that has consequences. The southwestern Seraj reduced speed at 3:36 a.m. from 48 knots to 35, then to 22. Her CPA recalculated from a near zero contact with the hull to 1.4 nautical miles, then 2.1 as the deceleration continued. She was not withdrawing. She was holding, watching, testing the response to her reduction. Would the American ship accelerate away? Would the helicopter reposition? Would anything change in the American formation's behavior that could be exploited? Nothing changed. The Sullivans held 16 knots. The Seahawk held its position. The Aegis system tracked all 5 contacts without interruption. At 3:39 a.m., the Moudge frigate activated its Fajr 2776mm gunfire control radar, a targeting radar, its emission profile unmistakably associated with fire control rather than surface search. The radar was pointed at USS The Sullivans. It was not a weapons employment indicator. The Moudge was still 29 nautical miles away, outside effective 76mm gun range, but it was an unambiguous escalatory signal. A fire control radar pointed at an American warship is a specific and serious communication in the language of maritime confrontation. It says, we have you in our sights. It says, we are one decision away from weapons employment. It is designed to trigger a reaction, a course change, an acceleration, any sign that the American ship is uncomfortable enough to move. The EW officer aboard the Sullivans detected the Fajr 27 emission at 3:39:14 a.m. He reported it to the TAO in 3 seconds flat. The TAO reported it to the commanding officer. The commanding officer looked at the bearing. He looked at the range. He looked at the Moudge's speed and projected track. He made a calculation that required no electronic assistance. 29 nautical miles at 22 knots, 76mm effective range, approximately 10 nautical miles. The Moudge would not enter weapons range for approximately 52 minutes. He authorized warning protocol Bravo. Warning Protocol Bravo is a graduated escalation response that falls well short of weapons employment, but communicates with complete clarity that the American ship has options it is choosing not to use. Not because it lacks them, but because the situation has not yet reached the threshold that would justify their use. The protocol has three components executed simultaneously. First, the Sullivans' own AN/SPY-1D radar shifted its emission mode to a specific power level and scan pattern associated with fire control preparation, not targeting lock, but the mode that precedes it, detectable by any electronic warfare receiver operating in the area. Second, the ship's Mark 45 5-inch gun mount on the forecastle slewed from its stowed position and trained to a bearing of 210, directly toward the Moudge. Not at maximum elevation, not in firing configuration, but visibly, deliberately pointed. Third, the Seahawk climbed from 200 feet to 600 feet and accelerated toward the Moudge's bearing, its own radar going active, painting the Iranian frigate with a targeting quality track from an airborne platform that the Moudge's crew could see on their radar warning receivers and could not easily dismiss as routine. The message of warning protocol. Bravo. For anyone reading it correctly, we know exactly what you're doing. We know exactly where you are. We have multiple systems that can address your threat if you choose to continue. And none of us, not one person aboard this ship, is uncertain about what happens next if you cross the line we have not yet asked you to cross. The Moudge's Fajr 27 fire control radar went to standby at 3:44 a.m., 5 minutes after it had activated. The Iranian frigate maintained her speed and course, but her emissions profile reverted to surface search mode. The radar that watches the ocean rather than the radar that aims at a specific target on it. The Seraj contacts were now all holding at distances between 7 and 14 nautical miles. None of them had closed further since the Seahawk repositioned at 3:36 a.m. 3 of the 4 were maintaining station, circling at reduced speed, staying visible, staying present, but not pressing the geometry tighter. The northeastern contact, bearing 017, range 14 nautical miles, had begun a slow turn to port that, if maintained, would carry it out of the immediate threat geometry entirely. At 3:51 a.m., 5th Fleet Headquarters in Manama, Bahrain, notified the Sullivans that USS Bulkley, DDG-84, had been detached from her current patrol tasking and ordered to increase speed toward the strait. Bulkley was currently 64 nautical miles southwest in the Gulf of Oman and would reach the strait entrance in approximately 2 hours and 20 minutes. Simultaneously, a P-8A Poseidon from VP-26, operating from Al Minhad Air Base, was alerted and would be airborne in under 40 minutes, adding an airborne maritime patrol asset with the full acoustic and radar sensor suite to the operational picture. The commanding officer acknowledged the support information. He noted it. He did not change his formation's behavior, because changing behavior in response to support arriving communicates to the adversary that you were not previously as comfortable as your conduct suggested, and the entire operational logic of gray zone deterrence depends on never giving the adversary that information. At 4:03 a.m., the northeastern Seraj contact completed its turn and was now on a clearly diverging course, opening from the Sullivans' position at 32 knots. At 4:07 a.m., A second Seraj, the northwestern contact at bearing 245, began a similar turn, decelerating first and then shifting to a course that placed it parallel to, but no longer closing on the American destroyer. The formation was unwinding, not in panic, not in disorder, in the deliberate, staged manner of a force that has decided the operation is not achieving its objectives and is extracting itself with sufficient dignity to avoid the appearance of rout. The Moudge altered course at 4:14 a.m. Her new heading was 185, due south, back toward Iranian coastal waters near Bandar Abbas. She maintained her speed of 22 knots. She did not transmit on Channel 16. She did not broadcast any further claims of Iranian maritime jurisdiction. She simply turned and proceeded away from the American warship that had not altered course, had not accelerated, had not done anything except hold its position with the patient, icy certainty of a crew that had been exactly here before and knew precisely how it was going to resolve. By 4:29 a.m., all 5 IRGCN contacts were on clearly diverging courses. The last Seraj, the southwestern contact that had come closest, the one the Seahawk had faced down at 7 nautical miles, turned south at 4:29 a.m. and accelerated to 40 knots, putting distance between itself and the Sullivans at a rate that suggested its crew had recalculated the attractiveness of this operation and found it considerably less attractive than it had seemed when the planning was done in the warmth of a briefing room ashore. The Seahawk recovered aboard at 4:44 a.m. USS The Sullivans cleared the northeastern end of the Strait of Hormuz and entered the Persian Gulf at 5:03 a.m. Her course had not changed since the contacts first appeared at 3:22 a.m. Her speed had not changed. The Moudge's fire control radar had been on for exactly 5 minutes and had not prompted a single degree of course deviation from the vessel it was pointed at. The 4 Seraj contacts had approached to within 7 nautical miles, found a Seahawk in their path and a 5-inch gun mount pointed at their mother ship, and withdrawn. The entire encounter had lasted 1 hour and 7 minutes from first contact to last diverging track. USS The Sullivans was in the Persian Gulf. The Strait of Hormuz was open. The oil was still flowing. The IRGCN's operation had been tactically ambitious, which is worth acknowledging. 5 vessels, pre-positioned across multiple approach vectors, timed to converge simultaneously, with a frigate in overwatch at medium range. This is not the improvised harassment of an undisciplined force. It reflects real planning, real coordination, and a genuine attempt to construct a tactical geometry that would pressure an American warship into a response it could not take back. The people who planned it understood what they were trying to do and built a plan designed to do it. The plan failed for the same reason IRGCN plans against American naval forces consistently fail. The force executing the plan is facing an adversary that is faster, better integrated, better informed, and better equipped at every level of the engagement envelope. The Seraj boats are fast, but the Seahawk was already airborne before they reached intercept range. The Moudge's fire control radar is real, but the Sullivan's EW suite detected it in 14 seconds, and the commanding officer's response rendered it strategically irrelevant in under 5 minutes. The coordinated approach from 4 vectors was designed to complicate the defensive picture, but the Aegis Combat System managed all 5 contacts simultaneously. without prioritization errors, track drops, or engagement timeline conflicts. Iran's gray zone doctrine in the Strait of Hormuz is built on the assumption that psychological pressure, applied consistently enough, will eventually produce an American response that can be narrated as a victory. What the doctrine has not successfully accounted for is a force so capable, so disciplined, and so confident in its technological superiority that the pressure simply does not register at the level required to produce the desired response. USS The Sullivans did not register the pressure. Not in her course. Not in her speed. Not in a single transmission that acknowledged the IRGCN's claims had any legal weight. She tracked every contact with precision, responded with exactly the graduated escalation the situation warranted, and continued her transit. Iran's Strait of Hormuz belongs to the world. The United States Navy sails through it to prove that fact. Tonight, the proof was delivered by 281 sailors, 1 Seahawk, and a fire control radar already tracking the Moudge before she knew she was being watched. Bye for now.